thing. I had the privilege of running a network sitcom, and I was attracted to a employee. I really want to be careful about that language. I think a huge part of the problem is a culture of feeling things that you think are unique and significant because they're happening to you, and saying things like I had feelings for, and I fell for, and all these things. I mean, the most clinical way I can put it in fessing up to my crimes is that I was attracted to a writer that I had power over because I was a showrunner. Flirty, creepy, everything other than overt enough to constitute betraying your live-in girlfriend to whom you're going home every night, who is actually smart enough and respectful enough to ask you, do you have feelings for that young writer that you're talking about, that you're paying all this attention to? And saying to her no, because the trick is if you lie to yourself, you can lie to everybody. It's really easy. And so that's what I continued to do, telling myself and anybody that threatened to confront me with it that if you thought what I was doing was creepy or flirty or unprofessional, then it's because you were the sexist. You were jealous. I was supporting this person. I'm a mentor. I'm a feminist. I broke up with my girlfriend, who I had lied to the whole time while lying to myself. Lied to her about why I was breaking up with her, because I thought that would make having inappropriate feelings for a coworker appropriate if I wasn't involved. I want you to be the one to examine this and every step of the way decide for yourself where I'm making mistakes. I don't want to explain to you what I've learned. I want you to look at this, and I want it to sound relatively unremarkable to you, because that's the danger. I broke up with my girlfriend, then I went right, full steam into creeping on my employee. Now it was even less appropriate after all. Now I wasn't in danger of being a bad person. And then after that season, I got overt about my feelings after it was wrapped, because now, and said, "Oh, I love you," and she said the same thing she'd been saying the entire time, in one language or another. Please, don't you understand that focusing on me like this, liking me like this, preferring me like this, I can't say no to it, and when you do it, it makes me unable to know whether I'm good at my job.
So recently, Dan Harmon came out and revealed that he had some misconduct with a former writer of his on a previous show. For those of you who don't know, Dan Harmon is one of the showrunners on Rick and Morty, and he was the main showrunner on a sitcom called Community that's very beloved by its fans. One that I really liked of what I saw, which was about 4 or 5 seasons. Oddly enough, I kind of stopped watching when Dan Harmon left the show in its 4th season for unrelated reasons. It wasn't a conscious thing, I just sort of stopped watching. And many of us just assumed NBC had kicked him off, but it now looks like he may have left intentionally in order to save face, because he had become obsessed with a coworker of his. He'd fallen deeply in love with her, and it would seem come almost to harassment with her, to the point where he more or less broke up with his longtime girlfriend in order to try and be with this writer who very clearly wanted nothing to do with him and was pretty fucked up by the whole experience. She was trying to focus on her job. She was trying to become like a really good writer, and she didn't know, she could never trust his word. Was she on the show because he liked her work, or was it because he wanted to sleep with her? That sort of stuff. And it kind of puts you in a weird place if you're an artist. So you can kind of see how that could kind of mess her up in the head, and at the same time you have this fat, heaving plop of a man sort of breathing heavily over you all the time. It's pretty distressing stuff. You can You can put that in your... Sorry for putting that image in your head. Dan Harmon is not the first dude to come out and address allegations like this. This has been very common over about the last 6 or so months at this point. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that, but there's a fair amount of schadenfreude in this. Hollywood is overwhelmingly Democratic, and to watch these people who have been hitching themselves to feminism be revealed as like serial harassers and all around weird sex perverts is pretty funny. Some of the allegations are a little goofy. Some of them are just bizarre. The Louis C.K. stuff in particular is very weird. More so than it is terrifying. Like, it's hard to put yourself in that scenario and not think, man, that's just weird. And in a very Louis C.K. way, kind of funny, oddly enough. A lot of these are one-time incidents that I don't think... A lot of these are one-time incidents, which does not forgive them, but I think in order to actually be, like, an issue, you have to have, like, a pattern. You know, to be a sexist, you have to have a pattern of misconduct rather than one or two incidents. And a lot of the times these happen a long time ago in the past, so now maybe they're parroting the feminism stuff in order to try and make up for it. Lotta, yada, yada, whatever, fuck it. The thing I want to talk about now is something I noticed in Dan Harmon's apology. I love this shit. I love any time someone has to eat crow. It's the most entertaining thing in the world to me. So I've seen a lot of these apologies. And what I've noticed between the ones that I've really paid attention to is a pretty constant problem, which is what I call the male feminist coping mechanism. This is how these people cope with the awful things they've done while maintaining their own ideological purity. How does someone like Dan Harmon, who spent, by all accounts, several years stalking this woman he worked with, how does he deal with that and also maintain his label as a feminist and not totally hate himself? How does he do that? Well, I'll tell you how he does that. In Dan Harmon's apology, he has a general tone, which is, I want to be an example. I want to show how you're supposed to respond to these things. And he's very apologetic. And it sounds like he's like, I want people to know this is how you respond to these things in a way that lets you move forward. And there's one exact moment I remember that always stuck out to me. I've seen this apology like 6 or 7 times now, and every time it sticks out to me. Pretty late in it, Dan Harmon says,
I never did it before, and I will never do it again, but I certainly wouldn't have been able to do it if I had any respect for women. On a fundamental level, I was thinking about them as different creatures. I was thinking about the ones that I liked as having some special role in my life. And I did it all by not thinking about it. So I just want to say, in addition to obviously being sorry, but that's really not the important thing, I want to say I did it by not thinking about it. And I got away with it by not thinking about it.
When he says that, what he's saying is, this is not a problem with me as a person. This is a problem with men. This is a problem with male human beings, period. That's where the absolution comes in. Now, Dan Harmon is no longer one man who was obsessed with one woman. Now, he is a man who gave in to his lesser nature and destroyed a woman's life. And he didn't even know he was doing it. He couldn't handle it. He couldn't stop it. How could he? He's just one man. You know, this is just something that all men do. It's not something that all men do. When you look at other examples of people responding to these allegations, very many of them come away with this tone of, I couldn't help myself. I couldn't stop it. And it's not because they were willfully ignorant, which they were. And it's not because maybe they weren't properly taught by their parents how to handle these situations, which they weren't. It's because society made them do this. It's because it's built into their DNA, and how can you fight nature? And then it turns into, I'm trying to better myself. I'm trying to ascend past my inherent nature. You know, it's the story of the frog and the scorpion. And the scorpion comes away from it, and he's like, no, I love frogs. Don't worry about it. You know, I stung a frog one time, but I'll tell you what, next time it happens, I will hold my stinger back. I am going to come over my nature as a monster, as an attacker. And we will cross this river together, my friend. It's bullshit. This is not inherent to being a man. I know that because I've never done it. I know that because my friends have never done it. I know that because I actually don't know if my dad ever did that, to be honest. But I know that because I've been surrounded by strong women my entire life. And they've been able to garner some level of success without ever talking about this shit. It just doesn't come up. Because, the women that are in my life, that are in my family, they work mid-tier jobs. They work customer support. They work in bars. They don't work glamorous shit in Hollywood, where you all have these egos and cults of personalities working against each other. My other favorite example of a super liberal Hollywood guy having to confront his worst nature is Joss Whedon. Joss Whedon, big Hollywood guy. He was like the geek. He was like the geek golden boy for a while. Directed the Avengers, Firefly, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, all sorts of shit. Some really good shit too. Some stuff better than others, but all around a pretty good oeuvre. He was a serial cheater. Now, he didn't do anything as bad as most of these dudes did. He didn't harass and stalk a woman for fucking 3-4 years, okay? So, first off, good on you, Josh. By all accounts, everything he did was consensual. He just cheated on his wife for like 15 years. Pretty shitty. Don't know if it's as shitty as stalking someone for a long-ass time, but pretty shitty. I tend to find that once you start comparing what's worse between shitty situations, you tend to lose the plot. It's kind of okay for these things to just sort of coexist as shitty together. So Joss Whedon's ex-wife actually came out and gave her half of this story and revealed that he had been sleeping with women in his TV productions, his movie productions, basically the whole time they were together. His wife, by the way, also a writer, also a producer on almost all of his work, and a big part of why he was so successful. Turns out, when she left, his stuff wasn't quite as successful, because it kind of sucked. His response to the constant issues of cheating was that society taught him that he had to be a caregiver and a partner to his wife, but also a conqueror and a provider. And he was able to do both, and he accepted that he was a success in society because he could do both. Horseshit. This is a fundamental part of being an adult, is being able to discern reality from fiction. If a story tells you that you have to be a conqueror and real life tells you have to be a provider, these are not both lessons society is teaching you. Society is teaching you, hey, you should be gentle and receptive to your wife, but you should also be able to do a good job. That does not mean that you should be cheating all the time. That does not mean that sexual conquest is a must. You're lying through your teeth because the notion that you're just a piece of shit who did something bad because you wanted to do something bad, it's too much for you. That's the male feminist coping mechanism. That's why there's such strong flag waivers for feminism. Because to them, this is their first step to absolution. This is them ascending their nature as aggressors, as attackers. This is not something most people have. I worked for about 2.5 years at a retail store. I don't work there anymore. Probably half, if not more, of my coworkers were women. At no point did I ever feel the need to conquer any of them. At no point was I like, oh, god damn it, this bitch doesn't want to go out with me? Well, fuck her. I'm gonna make her life hell, and I'm gonna treat her scripts like shit, and I'm gonna tell her that she didn't stack the fucking cans right. No. I just didn't feel that way. Because I was able to separate my work life from my personal life. There were women I worked with that I thought were grade A cunts. But you know what? They didn't make the job harder. Sometimes they made the job easier because they were really efficient. They just didn't make it very fun, but the job got done. So I didn't give a shit. I didn't make a fucking to-do about it, and I wasn't a child who was petty about it. I was able to recognize that, hey, I'm here, I'm being paid to do something, I can separate myself from this. Dan Harmon is in his fucking 40s. He was in his at least late 30s when this event happened. And he had a crush on a girl he worked with. But he also had a girlfriend. He couldn't have asked this girl, hey, would you be interested in going out sometime? And then she would have been like, not really, and you're kind of my boss, so I think it'd be weird. Or he couldn't have told someone, like his friend, like, hey man, I kind of got an issue here, and I don't really know what to do. Or maybe his girlfriend. Maybe come to his girlfriend and be like, hey, this is kind of weird, but I kind of have these feelings for this girl I work with, and I don't want to leave you, but I want to deal with these feelings to sort of get them out of my system. And I don't really know what to do. Maybe talk to a therapist. Maybe seek fucking help instead of burying it deep in you and then pretending like, well, that's just what men do. That's just the natural order of things. It isn't. And the part where people try to argue that because it's the nature of things, even if it was the nature of things, getting past your nature is a basic part of being a human being. That's what makes humans humans. It's not hard. It might be in your base nature to go out and just start fights because you want to start fights, but you don't do it because that makes your life way harder, because that's not how human civilization works. These aren't difficult concepts to understand, but for some reason, these guys just can't handle it. And the answer is because they're lying. They know, deep down, they know that's not the reason they do this. Why did Dan Harmon obsess about this woman for so long? Probably because Dan Harmon has a severe personality disorder, and he doesn't understand that people are people. He doesn't understand that this was an actual person with actual feelings, and that this person has a job to do. They're not necessarily here to fall in love. And, oh, by the way, Dan, you kind of already have someone who loves you, so maybe, back the fuck up and reassess your priorities. Yada, yada, yada. Maybe think with your head instead of your cock for once. So on and so forth. Why did Joss Whedon do what he did? Joss Whedon did what he did because these really hot young women wanted to fuck him. And Joss Whedon's kind of a schlubby guy. No one else is going to fuck him. His wife probably didn't even want to fuck him that much. And instead of just accepting that and maybe working out more, or maybe, doubling down on his wife and trying to find, like, new aspects of her personality to fall in love with, or maybe even going to the fucking gym for once in his goddamn life. No, he just slept with them because they wanted to for some godforsaken reason. It's a severe lack of self-control. I think the most telling thing about this is it actually explains why Rick and Morty is starting to fall to pieces. Rick and Morty, the main character, is a dude named Rick. Rick is a nihilist. He's just an all-around shitty person. He's awful. He siphons, he's a leech. He lives off of his daughter, and he puts down his daughter's husband, even though he's living in his fucking house, so on and so forth. And the clear endpoint for Rick and Morty is that Rick becomes the villain, and Morty kills him and goes on with his life as a normal person. You ever seen Moral Orel? That's what needs to happen. Just at the very end, they just say, Morty just sort of fucking leaves it behind, and he actually lives a pretty fun life. He lives a finally okay life. It's cool. But in this most recent season, they don't do that. They kind of hint that they're going to do that Rick is going to take steps towards redemption, but he doesn't. He just doesn't. And the reason he doesn't is because Rick is Dan Harmon. Dan Harmon admits in his apology that he used drugs and alcohol in order to deal with his problems instead of actually dealing with them. Dan Harmon is a nihilist and just an all-around shitty dude. So when Dan Harmon writes Rick Sanchez, and he comes to that point where Rick Sanchez is a villain, Dan Harmon has to confront that part of himself. He has to look at himself and say, what do I want to happen here? And what he wants to happen is vindication. He wants to be vindicated in his actions. So that's what happens to Rick. But that's not what should happen. That's not the natural end result. And the natural end result is that Rick's actions catch up with him, and everyone he loves leaves him alone. That's what's happening to Dan Harmon. That's the only thing that can happen. And until these people stop pouring this aspect of themselves into their work and start to actually look at themselves critically, this is always going to happen. At some point, you have to recognize, am I using my work to explore my emotions in a healthy way, or am I using it as a way to just get them out of me so I don't have to deal with them?